According to ancient Jewish norms, a man can marry and have sex with a girl as young as 3. This ruling is found in the Talmud and is based on the precedent set by the Jewish prophet Isaac, who married Rebekah when she was 3 and he was 40.
So the Bible does not speak about the age of marriage, number one. Number two, we've got Rebekah marrying Isaac at the age of 3 years old. She was 3 years old.
Secondly, according to Jewish tradition, the age of marriage, and this comes from Genesis 21 and 22, where Isaac marries Rebekah at the age of 40 years old. But how old was Rebekah? Well, according here to Genesis 21 and 22, we find that Rebekah was only 3 years old. And this is confirmed by all rabbinic scholars.
When is she halal to be married? How long did he wait for from her birth?
He would wait until she would be fit for relations, 3 years, and he married her. Subhanallah.
Isaac, according to the Bible, was 40 years old when he married a 3-year-old Rebekah.
God's mother married Joseph when he was 90 and she was 12. And even Isaac marrying in the Old Testament, Rebekah.
Since Isaac was 37 when his mother died, and he was 37 when Rebekah was born. So Rebekah would be how old? 3 years old.
Isaac was 37 years old when Rebekah was born. And Isaac was 40 years old when Rebekah, at the age of 3 years old, was married to Isaac. Lie.
Isaac was 37 years old at the period when Rebekah was born, and he waited until she was fit for marriage, 3 years old, and then married her.
Are you sure about that? So as you can see from the intro, that a lot of Muslims, especially Muslim da'is, who are the ones who teach Dawah, teach the conversion to Islam, they like to claim that Rebekah was 3 in order to excuse Muhammad from being a this doesn't work. Muhammad is still a and they say that Isaac was a because he married Rebekah when she was 3. So Muslims teach this, and is it true? Was Rebekah really 3 years old when Isaac married her? Short answer, no. Long answer, no. This doesn't make any sense. Now, the source that they're pulling it from is from Rashi, a Jewish rabbi in the around 1000 AD. But he didn't actually teach this. It's actually a misconception of what he taught. Like, there's like 2 or 3 other guys who did teach it based on an interpretation of Rashi. But let's say he did teach this. Does that matter? Because Jews today and Christians today don't believe Rebekah was 3 whatsoever. It's actually extremely easy to prove that Rebekah wasn't 3. In this video, we're going to go through 5 or 6 different ways to show and prove that Rebekah was not 3. And we can actually deduce a general age of what she actually would have been. But here's why this is important. If Rebekah isn't 3, and all these Muslim da'is like Muhammad Hijab and Ali Dawah and Muslim Lantern and Deed Responds and Sheikh Uthman, all these guys are spouting this lie. They're willing to lie to you. What else are they willing to lie to you about? If Rebekah isn't 3 and all your da'is are affirming that she is 3, are you believing or you're trusting a bad source of information? You as a Muslim, if you believe that Rebekah was 3 because of your da'is and she's not 3, why are you trusting them? Why are you believing them? Maybe you should consider other sources for information, other sources for truth. That's my plea for you for this video. If you can make it through this video, you can see how obviously Rebekah was not 3. Maybe you should question who you're actually following for your information. So here's the actual source of where this idea comes from. This is from Rashi on Genesis 25. And we have, for when Abraham came from Mount Moriah, he received the news that Rebekah was born. Isaac was then 37 years old because at that time Sarah died. And from the birth of Isaac until the binding of Isaac, when Sarah died, died, there were 37 years since she was 90 years old when Isaac was born, and 127 when she died, as it is said in 23:1. And the life of Sarah was 127 years. And thus, Isaac was 37 years old at her death, which is true. At that period, Rebekah was born, and he waited until she was fit for marriage, 3 years, and then he married her. This doesn't actually say that Rebekah was 3, and we actually see this on other commentaries who talk about Rashi's comment. So this is in around 500 years later in the Talmud. We have one of the other rabbis commenting on Rashi's commentary. Rashi comments on this apparently historically irrelevant detail that the Torah informed us that Isaac, after marrying Rebekah, waited for 3 years until she was old enough to engage in intercourse and become pregnant, 14 years old. So the way later rabbis interpreted this passage was one of two ways. One, that she waited 3 years in order for her to be fit for marriage, so for her to be at least 14, or that she was 3 years old. Now, there's 2 or 3 rabbis that affirm that she was actually 3 years old. The rest of them affirm that she was 14 or older, depending on your view. But almost all the rabbis, this is the majority position, is that she was at least 14, not 3. And if we continue going, we also see that another rabbi on Deuteronomy 37 claims that Rebekah lived to the age of 133 years, same as that of Kedat, son of Levi. Our author calculates that if Rebekah had been only 3 years old at the time when she was married, that calculation would be wrong by 11 years. So again, we have multiple ways to prove and show that later rabbis didn't actually think Rebekah was 3. We also have, towards the end of this, that as proof that Rebekah could not have been only 3 years old when Eliezer met her, he cites the fact that her brother and mother referred to her as a Nara, a term never applied to someone younger than 12 and a half years of age. The well-known traditional historic text known as Seder Olam, which is what Rashi is quoting from, in its first chapter also writes that when Abraham returned from the binding of Isaac, he was told that Rebekah had been born. The meaning of that midrash was that she had been born some time ago. Another proof that she was of age is that we have an ironclad rule that parents must not marry off a girl who has already reached puberty unless she has been asked and given her consent. The fact that in our chapter Rebekah's family proceeds to ask for her consent proves that without it the parents could not have married her off. We have in later rabbinic sources, because I've brought this up with Muslims before and they're like, oh, I'm going to trust the Jews on this. Well, here's the Jewish commentary that explains what Rashi's interpretation should have been, because it's obvious that she couldn't have been 3 because she's called words that a 3-year-old can't fit. Also, if a woman is pubescent, she has to be asked and given consent to marriage in Jewish practice. So we have, from the Jewish sources, good reason to believe that rabbis didn't actually teach that she was 3, other than a misinterpretation of one rabbi's, now Rashi is an influential rabbi, but only one rabbi's quote. But this quote is being misused. So if we actually go to the text itself, it becomes immediately obvious that this idea that she was only 3 years old fails in so many spectacular ways. Let's break this down one by one. 1, Sarah was 90 years old whenever she gave birth to Isaac. That's pretty obvious. Then whenever we jump to 23 and she did die at 127 years old. So for sure, Isaac was 37 when Sarah died. And Sarah died at the beginning of 23. The statement in which Rebekah was born is at the end of 22. So if we read this, we see this is after the binding of Isaac. After the binding of Isaac, he goes home, and sometime later, Abraham was told, Milcah is also a mother. She has borne sons to your brother Nahor. Uz, the firstborn, Buz, his brother, Kimil, the father of Abraham, Kesed, Hazo, Pildesh, Jidlapah, that was bad pronunciation, and Bethuel. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah. Milcah bore these 8 sons to Abraham's brother Nahor, and his concubine, whose name was Reumah, also had sons Teba, Garama, Tahash, and Maacah. So Bethuel is the father of Rebekah outright. This is actually an aside. Inside of the Hebrew, we have this disjunction that happens. Actually shows because it is a wa clause, which we have here. So this vav, this wa, is a consecutive disjunction with a perfect verb afterward with became. So this grammatical structure suggests that the author is throwing in this detail. It's not actually part of this list. So what's happening here is Abraham is getting a report. He was given a message from a messenger where Milcah had all of these kids. You can see the quotation marks from this translator has just this bit be the message. Bethuel became the father of Rebekah is an aside from the author where he's projecting in future knowledge about the events into the text. But this is not what Abraham was told. He was not told that Rebekah was also born at this moment in time. The text actually doesn't say that he's told about Rebekah's birth at all. We don't even know if he actually knew that he had the daughter Rebekah. That's not in the text. So in the text itself, you can't actually show that Abraham received the news of Rebekah's birth here. So there is no textual evidence of Rebekah's birth in the text like whatsoever. Nowhere in the text does it say when she was actually born, so we can't actually establish a timeline anywhere based on this because it doesn't actually say she was born here. If you say that she is born here and that all of these other guys are born here at the same time, well, Bethuel and Rebekah are father and daughter. In order to say that this whole passage is one birth, like, hey, all these people are born at the same time, in order to take that view, you have to say that the father and the daughter are the same age. Now, I hope you have enough critical thinking skills to know that a dad and the daughter cannot be born at the same time. So this time frame, these 8 brothers and the daughter, that is, at least a couple decades, 10 to 20 years. And the father also has to be able to give birth, and that's going to be another 20 years. So this might be like a 30 to 40 year time span between when Uz and Rebekah was born. We have no idea. Might even be later than that. Might be 50, 60 years. Because we don't know how old Bethuel was whenever he gave birth to Rebekah, especially because Bethuel isn't in the story whenever Rebekah is given in marriage. It's just Laban and their mother. So there is no mention of when Bethuel dies. He's not alive whenever Rebekah is old enough to get married and whenever Isaac marries her. We have no idea what the time scale is here, what the time span is. We have absolutely no idea. One thing to know, from 21, so the birth of Isaac, to 25 is 40 years of time, because Isaac buries him and then he is 40 here. 40 years pass in 3 chapters. Even if, like, Rebekah might be older than Isaac, we don't know. The words used for her could be any time scale, and she's just an unmarried woman. Now, it indicates a younger woman, so she's probably under 30, but we don't know. That's the whole point. You do not actually have a case that she is 3 based on the text, based on any math, based on any calculation. It doesn't work because her date of birth is not given, period. It's not given as part of the report. It's not in the text, it's not in the grammar. It doesn't make sense to conclude it here. So there's absolutely no textual support whatsoever for when she was born, but can we actually look at the linguistic evidence of how she's described to know, okay, what age is she? Because Hebrew has words for different ages of women, and we're going to look at that. So we have Eliezer, who is Abraham's servant. He's being loaded up with 10 camels, and then he makes his way out to Rebekah, specifically to find Bethuel and his children. Eliezer was sent to Abraham's relatives, and in this he was going to go find a woman, an Isha. So specifically he was told, go find a wife. Well, in Hebrew, this word wife is Isha. Isha means woman, it means wife, it means a grown adult. You would never use this of a child, period, outright, couldn't work. So he's told, hey, go find a grown woman for my son to marry. Okay, Rebekah comes out with her jar on her shoulder. She had a jar on her shoulder. This type of jar is a clay jar. They're fairly heavy. If you ever try to pick one up, they're pretty big and round. You put them on your shoulder or your head. That's how people carry them in the Middle East. These things get fairly heavy. They get especially heavy whenever you have water in them, because water is fairly heavy. If you've ever picked up a bucket full of water, you'll know that that's a feat in and of itself. For her to be a 3-year-old, to have the jar on her shoulder in general would have been kind of miraculous. She would have been roided out. Well, the problem is a 3-year-old only weighs around 30 pounds, and my son is like 26 pounds or something like that right now. He's on the smaller side. He's 3. So I have a 3-year-old. I am deeply familiar with what a 3-year-old can actually pick up and what they can't pick up. This jar by itself would have been on the edge of what a 3-year-old could pick up in general. Once you fill it with water, it's not possible. They biologically cannot lift that much. It doesn't matter. Like, you give them steroids, they're not going to be lifting that much weight. It's heavier. It's double their weight. You're not going to be doing it. And not only did she do this, she lowered it and gave him a drink and also gave enough for all the camels. To go from here to here with that jar, that's not a feat that the biceps of a 3-year-old could do, let alone tip it just enough to get water out for him and then untip it. This is not a feat that a 3-year-old can do biologically. It just doesn't work. It's too heavy. But also, they don't have enough endurance. This is 10 camels. A camel can drink around 200 liters or 53 gallons of water. So this is around 2,000 liters of water that she is pouring out of a well. I don't know if you ever tried to draw water out of a well. It's incredibly difficult. Their wells, you had to go down staircases into it and then suck the water, and it was like a spring that fed into the well, and you had to get it up out of it, and then you had to go back. That whole process, doing that once, would exhaust an average American now because we are not in shape. But even let's say you're in shape, that takes an incredible amount of endurance. You have to be doing physical labor every day in order to be able to do this type of labor, but you have to be able to do that as an adult. Children cannot do that. They don't have the stamina, they don't have the endurance, basically the same thing, and they don't have the strength. Their muscles would snap. They would become a pool of Jetto by the time all 10 camels would drink 2,000 liters. A baby can't do that. They just can't. And most adults can't even do that nowadays. You're telling me that a little 3-year-old could draw enough water for 10 camels from a heavy jar in a well that you have to go into and come out of with stairs in order to do it and like pour it into the trough so the camels drink? It's not gonna happen. Grammatically, we know that she was not actually included then, so she's not 3. Biologically, she couldn't be 3 because of this feat. Now, linguistically, we can actually know that she wasn't 3 based on the words attributed to her. So this word here, woman, is nara. So if I pull up the Hebrew here, we have nara. This word was only used from 12 and a half to 25. So it would be a pubescent woman up until mid to late 20s. That would be who was called nara. So automatically, she couldn't be 3. And if we look at this, she's also called a betula. Betula is a virgin. This word would not be used of a 3-year-old because also there is a commentary, which is kind of gross. There's a commentary in the Hebrew sources where the fact that she's called a betula here, a virgin, according to the view that Rebekah was only 3 years old, why the Torah needed to add that she was a virgin, since the Talmud says that any 3-year-old girls that had been violated by someone, her hymen will grow again, something that was known to the people in those days. If the text specified that she was a betula, that she was a virgin, that she had her hymen, she couldn't have been 3. It would not have used it if she was a 3-year-old because the hymen would regrow. Kind of gross. She had an increased number of stem cells and things can grow back way easier when you're a kid than when you're an adult. Either way, from the Jewish sources, from the Jewish understanding and the culture surrounding it, this word wouldn't be used, both because the hymen would regenerate, according to their view, and it was not used, it was not appropriate to be used in that context, is that the word betula indicates like sexual activity. So you wouldn't be talking about a child with that word. That's kind of gross. I wouldn't say a virgin toddler. That's kind of gross. If you have to specify virgin toddler for anyone, you're kind of a creepy dude. Don't be creepy. Anyway, so she's called a Nara, which doesn't make sense for a 3-year-old. She's called a Betula, she doesn't make sense for a 3-year-old. She's also called very beautiful. And this phrase, because Logos puts it in right to left, she's called a Nara, she's called a Betula, and this phrase here, she was very beautiful. This phrase here means exceptionally beautiful in appearance. So she was exceedingly pleasant to look at. Well, this doesn't really make sense with a 3-year-old because this phrase is used to describe an exceedingly beautiful person to behold, to take in. You know, like your supermodel, but it doesn't have to necessarily be sexual in context. It's more so you're just like in awe of their physical appearance, like, wow, that person is stunning to look at. That's the way that she's being described. Well, even though this doesn't carry the, sensual overtones like desire or covet or any word used in Song of Solomon, it still has that sense where if a man was to gaze at this type of woman, this woman with this type of appearance, he could desire her. It could cause lust. So the type of beauty that she has could entice lust in a man. Now, in order to say that this is for a 3-year-old, again, it's really creepy. And this is the author of it talking. And this would be Moses or God, which is what we believe is, it's inspired word of God. So you have to basically say that God is like doing some real creepy clown stuff, some Skittles. It doesn't, no. Anyway, so this phrase would not be used of a child. This word wouldn't be used of a child. This word would be used of a child. We have other words as well. So again, she's called an Nara. She's called an Isha. Again, so Isha. And then again, this is an Alma, which we'll get to. So this word here, Isha, this word is always used of a grown woman. Specifically, it's interchangeable with wife. She is called this directly. This is not something you would call a baby, a toddler. It just doesn't work. So for her to be called an Isha, here, let her become the Isha of your master's son. So this, in this context, is wife, but you still wouldn't call her that. It just doesn't make any sense whatsoever. I can't think of a good comparison to English or even Arabic. I'm sure there is one, but anyway, this gets into Isaiah 7:14 for is the Messiah to be born of a virgin or not? Well, she's called an Alma here, a young woman. And a young woman typically would be a woman of pubescent or post-pubescent, so from like 13, 14 to 30, who wasn't married. So an unmarried young woman. So she's called an Alma. She's also called a virgin, a Betula. So she's both. So, for the whole, Matthew didn't actually quote, the Bible correctly because it was Alma in 7:14 for Isaiah. This actually kind of shows that Alma and Betula can be interchangeable. That'll get into the next Isaiah video. So she's called an Alma, she's called an Ra, she's called a Isha, she's called Betula. She's called all these things. She's never once called a Yalda. There's a word in Hebrew that you can actually use to describe a female child. One that was used perfectly for a 3-year-old, and it's Yalda. It's Yod, Lemed, Dalet, He. These word means little girl. It means toddler. It means child. It means female child. It means young girl. Not woman, not young woman, young girl. If a 3-year-old was to be described, it would be Yalda. She is called 4 different words for woman in the text. Never once is she's called a Yalda. She is not a 3-year-old. It doesn't work whatsoever. So, next piece of evidence, Rebekah was asked, will you go with this man? I will go, she said. So she's able to assent to marriage. Now this demonstrates a cognitive feat that 3-year-olds can't really comprehend. Yesterday, my son wanted me to cut the tag off of his teddy bear. He's 3 and a half. I told him, sure, I can do that, but I want to make sure that you know that once this thing is gone, it's gone for good. I cut it off, and then he started crying because I threw it away. Even though he assented to it, he didn't understand what it meant. Rebekah here is assenting to marriage, the most important thing you can do in this life other than giving your life to God. In the Jewish context, in the Jewish history, in the Jewish understanding, she would not have been able to give consent to marriage if she was a child. And once you're pubescent, then you actually are asked whether or not you consent. So a child could be given in marriage, but it would be up to the father, or the man in charge if it was the brother, so Laban in this instance. It would be up to her dad, Bethuel, or Laban, since Bethuel seems to be dead here. It would not be up to Rebekah. So for Rebekah to be asked, will you go, it indicates that she's cognitively able to consent and that she's post-pubescent, because you would only ask this of a woman if she was already pubescent. So from the Jewish context, her being asked is proof that she was not a 3-year-old. She also had the emotional ability to assent, which is not something a 3-year-old has, which I brought up in the Jewish rabbinical source earlier. We also have veiling. Whenever Isaac came to her, she saw him and said, who is the man in the field coming to meet us? The servant Eliezer said, he is my master. She took her veil and covered herself. And the servant told Isaac all he had done. Isaac brought her into the tent of his mother Sarah, and he married Rebekah. So she became his wife, and he loved her, and Isaac was comforted after his mother's death. She had a veil. Veiling is not something that children would do. The whole purpose of the veil is for modesty whenever a young woman of marriageable age is around either her suitor or potential suitors. So for her to be veiling at all means that she would be an adult woman, or at least a woman of marriageable age, not a toddler. A 3-year-old doesn't have a veil whatsoever. You would get your veil at like 13 and then you would use it, but before puberty you wouldn't have a veil. You just wouldn't have. So for her to have her veil and for her to choose to cover herself, she is practicing Jewish practices that you'd only do as a teenager, period. This is still a thing that they do today. It's in Near Eastern cultures, they veil. It's a sign of modesty. It's a sign of respect. It's a sign of showing that you're of marriageable age, that you're able to be married. So, yeah, we have in the Anchor Yale Bible Dictionary that in their entry on marriage, that the veil was given to teenagers in order to kind of bridge the gap between childhood and adulthood whenever they're now ready for marriage. So the veil is symbolizing that they are marriageable. You have the veil in the marriage ceremony. You also have the veil to show your status as a potential bride or your status as a bride. Once you're married, the veil comes off. So only for a little bit of time where veiling for betrothed and married women were actually a thing. you wouldn't do it as a child and you wouldn't do it as an older woman. It would just be post-pubescent girls, not 3-year-olds. To some other context, Sumerian and Akkadian societies, veiling was actually really normal for those age ranges, not for children. So not only do we have Jewish culture, we also have other cultures within the Middle East who practiced veiling at this age. That shows that Rebekah was at that age. Every context we have of this passage shows that she was at least 14 onward. So somewhere between 14 and 30 was Rebekah's age. Now, one bit of thing to know, she's said that she has a nurse that came with her after Rebekah got married. So her nurse, Deborah, comes with her. Well, Deborah dies right around the same age as Isaac. She dies in 35. And then Isaac dies immediately after. So Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, dies, but she comes along on the journey with her. Muslims like to say that because she had a nurse, she was still nursing. She was still an infant who required milk. No. It's actually an interesting thing. So in the Jewish context, in the Jewish culture, specifically ancient Jewish culture, nurses would actually be accompanying young women as they got married if they were of higher status. But because they had some affluence, she had a nurse, not to help with her, but to help with her children. So Deborah actually traveled with Jacob, one of Rebekah's children, his entire life. She died on the trail with him. So as he was wandering, Deborah was with him. So she was a maternal figure for Jacob, but she was probably in similar ages as Rebekah. She was not much older than her because she died at the same time as Isaac. So unless she lived an extraordinarily long life, she was at similar ages, so she would have been between 30 and 40. It doesn't make sense to apply her as the nurse, like the wet nurse of Rebekah. Instead, nurses in that culture would just take care of the children that the woman would be producing. So she would be aiding in the marriage of Rebekah going forward, not in Rebekah's upbringing. She was not a mother to Rebekah. That doesn't make any sense. So the evidence that Muslims use against this is very weak, it just doesn't make any sense. As I mentioned before, Genesis 22, these events is not actually timed because this is an aside. It's not actually a part of the narrative. So the events of the binding of Isaac and Sarah's death are actually kind of unrelated. We don't know how old Isaac was during this. It just says sometime later God tested Abraham. Isaac was likely in his teenage years whenever he was placed on the offer. He was not 37 whenever this happened, more than likely. So sometime later, and then sometime later, these occurred. So we don't know what the time, this might be 10 years after the binding of Isaac. This might be 15 years after the binding of Isaac. It might be 20 years after the binding of Isaac that he's told about this. It might be 20 years after the binding of Isaac that Sarah died. We don't actually know how long passages happened. We don't know how long time spans were between each word of Genesis. We just don't. Specifically, the chapters with Isaac in it. Not only that, Abraham was told this news from his brother. His brother still lived in Hebron. He lived in Haran, or vice versa. The distance from Hebron to Haran is around 800 miles. So 800 miles was the travel distance. And, that would take weeks to months to travel from one place to the other. So this is not that important of news for him to send out a messenger to hey, go tell my brother or my cousin. Go tell all my relatives, I had all these kids. This is a very, very long distance that you had to travel back then by camel. Or by foot. This is not a distance that you would just travel casually. So this news was likely not instantaneous. This was likely decades in the making. Hey, we have all this news to bring him now. It would be months between communications. That's if they chose to do it at all, because the journey itself would be perilous. So we have no idea. The news of Rebekah's birth here, if it was even included at all, which grammatically it isn't from the grammar of the Hebrew. Well, let's say it is. Even if it was, news traveled so slowly back then, especially because they were in a desert and in deserted mountains, because they were in this rough terrain that took a long time to travel, and they had such a great distance between them. It could be decades, years between events happening and them being told about it. So even if nothing else, the amount of time it would have taken for Rebekah to be born and then the news to reach Abraham Abraham would be longer than 3 years in and of itself. Now, there's also nothing within the text that suggests a quick succession from one moment to the next. From the jump between 21 to 23 is 37 years. We have no idea how the sequence of events between his birth and Sarah's death, we have no idea what the time span is between each of those events. There's nothing in the text that suggests that it was a quick fire succession of events. It just records events that happened with no timeline whatsoever. To establish a timeline on this is an incredibly hyper-literalist view of scripture that the scripture itself doesn't support, and that later commentators who took that view didn't actually take that. They took that she was 14 because of the use of Nara, because of the use of Betula, because of these words, virgin and young woman. They did not believe that the text actually believed that it was that way. Not only that, we have, and he married Rebekah. So he brings her into the tent, and he married her. Well, in the Hebrew, what this word actually is took. This is Yakia. Yakia at Rebekah. So he took. It's slang. You know, sometimes this word is used literally like, oh, you pick up something. Over 20 times in the Hebrew, this word is used as a slang word for sex. So he took Rebekah. He took her virginity, and so she became his wife. So here, him having sex with her, you know, he consummated, and she became his wife, his Isha, and he loved her. Beautiful. But he had sex with Rebekah. So she's not 3. There's no time here. She met him, then the servant had told her, and then he went inside, and then they, did the hanky spanky. He had sex with her. She was not 3. If she was 3, then the text itself says that he directly penetrated a 3-year-old. Muslims don't believe that. They believe that he married her and then waited to have sex with her, just as the prophet did. This does not say that. This says that she had sex with him at that moment in time. A 3-year-old can't have sex with a man without risking death. Do you really want to say that the prophet Isaac, that you revere as a prophet, as a Muslim, do you really want to say that he endangered his wife by risking her death by doing this? That he made love to a 3-year-old? Really? Now, Christians and Jews, we look at this text and we're like, oh, that's awesome, that's beautiful. Great. She was a woman, a grown woman. She had the ability to choose to have consensual relations with her husband. Your view as a Muslim that she was 3, this doesn't work. That would be because a 3-year-old cannot consent to relations. They just can't. So I created a syllogism to prove that she wasn't 3. Premise 1. If Rebekah was 3 years old when she married Isaac, the biblical text would support her birth being reported in Genesis 22, 20 through 40. And her actions and descriptions would be consistent with those of a 3-year-old. However, the Bible does not confirm her birth was part of the news in Genesis 22, 20 through 40. And her actions, drawing water for 10 camels, giving consent, veiling herself, and descriptions of her, the Nara, the Betula, the Alma, are inconsistent with a 3-year-old. Conclusion, therefore, Rebekah was not a 3 years old whenever she married Isaac. It's that simple. There's absolutely no reason, linguistically, physically, behaviorally, culturally, textually, there's absolutely no reason to think that she was a 3-year-old. So with Rebekah not being a 3-year-old, which I think I've done a good job showing here, that she couldn't have been a 3-year-old based on the text, based on the Hebrew, and based on the Jewish context. She can't be a 3-year-old according to the text, and also the Jewish commentaries say that she's not a 3-year-old. So for sure, she is not a 3-year-old. Yet your Da'is are affirming that she is 3. They're lying to you. What else are they lying about? Think about that. Are they lying about Jesus? Are they lying about the Bible and its corruption? Are they lying about the preservation of the Quran? Now, my answer to that is yes, they are. The Quran's not been perfectly preserved. The Bible has been preserved through its copious manuscripts and textual criticism. And Jesus is God. He claimed to be God. And God came down, he lived, and he died for you and for me. So really take this to heart. If you've made it this far, take this to heart. Think about it. Why is it that your Da'is are lying to you? What do they want from you? Your attention, your money, what you can give them. What do they want to give you? Nothing. They just want to take from you. They don't care about the truth. They don't care about Islam. They don't care about you. They are fine with you burning in hell from their lies. Don't trust them. Read the Bible. Decide for yourself what is true. May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you always.